A millionaire stepped out of his car in downtown LA, flanked by bodyguards and cameras, only to be stopped by a barefoot girl holding a broken music box. She didn't ask for money. She didn't flinch. She just looked him in the eye and said, "I can make your son walk again." The street fell silent. He stared, confused. Was she mocking him, or did she truly know something no one else did, if this story pulls at something deep in you? Stay with us. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a thought. It means more than you think. The marble floor in the grand lobby of the Millennium Biltmore didn't echo under Robert Langston's footsteps, not because he was light, but because everything about that place swallowed sound. It was built that way. Polished stone, velvet curtains, dim chandeliers that dropped like frozen time above the heads of people used to not looking down. Robert moved through that silence, one hand on the back of his son's wheelchair, the other adjusting his cufflinks without thinking. Eli sat still, thinner than he had been 6 months ago, his face pale against the dark navy of his hoodie. Outside, the valet area buzzed with men in black vests and polished shoes. Robert paused at the glass door, reached forward, and pushed it open with his elbow. The LA sunlight spilled onto the steps like it always did, bright, dry, indifferent. He didn't notice the girl right away. She was crouched by the dumpsters near the edge of the service lane, hidden in a slice of shadow most people would walk past. Her hair was matted, her jeans torn at the knees. She had no shoes. A security guard noticed her before Robert did and started toward her with the posture of someone who'd done this 100 times. "Ma'am," he called firmly, "you can't be back here." She stood up slowly, brushing her hands against her shirt. Then she turned, sharp, direct, and looked at Robert. Not the way people look at wealth or fame, but the way someone looks at a loose thread they know they've seen before. "I can help your son walk again," she said. The words didn't shout. They dropped into the air like they belonged. Robert froze mid-step. It wasn't the content that threw him. It was the confidence, the absolute stillness in her voice. Eli, silent until then, turned slightly in his chair, eyes lifting to her face. She didn't smile. She didn't move closer. She just waited. Robert said nothing. He blinked, adjusted his grip on the wheelchair, and then moved forward, as if the moment hadn't happened. But something in his pace shifted. He walked slower, heavier. He didn't realize he was staring at the ground. Inside the black Lincoln parked at the curb, he strapped Eli in, started the engine, and told himself to forget it. Just another street kid playing God. LA was full of them. But when they turned the corner onto Grand Avenue, Eli asked, "Dad?" What did she say? Robert didn't answer right away. He watched the stoplight blink from green to yellow. "Nothing," he said. "Finally." She was confused. Eli didn't press. He looked out the window like he always did, quiet, respectful, distant. Robert reached to turn on the radio, then changed his mind. His fingers hovered over the dial. That night, Robert didn't sleep. He made a drink, stared out the window of his Pasadena home, and tried to recall the exact tone in her voice. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't mocking. It was clean, like water falling in a still room. By morning, something had shifted. He canceled Eli's appointment at the rehabilitation clinic, gave his assistant a vague excuse about a change in schedule, and drove them both back downtown. When he pulled into the parking garage beneath the hotel, Eli looked at him, puzzled. "I thought we weren't coming here again." "I just need to check something," Robert said. They took the elevator up, then the back stairwell down again. The alley behind the Biltmore still smelled like wet cardboard and old grease, but the girl wasn't there. Robert stood at the edge of the shadow near the dumpster, hands in his coat pockets. Eli didn't ask questions. He simply looked, just like his father did, at the empty space where someone had said something impossible. She wasn't there, but the silence she left behind was. The early sun had begun to soften the edges of the streets as Robert pulled his black sedan into the narrow strip of cracked curbside along Fremont Avenue. This part of Los Angeles had no luster, no sharp suits or spotless awnings. Here, Even the trees looked tired, their branches sagging under years of smog and weight. Robert stepped out first, then opened the back door and carefully lifted Eli from his seat. The boy's legs, thin and still, settled into the wheelchair with the ease of habit. The sidewalk was uneven. The wheels stuttered over the cracks. Ahead stood Youth Haven Shelter, a red brick building that used to be a fire station. Now its sign was faded, some of the letters missing, and the flag on the pole out front barely moved. A young man, lean and sleepy-eyed, sat behind the check-in desk just inside the door. He wore a faded hoodie and smelled faintly of cigarettes. Robert stepped in, the scent of bleach and old paper drifting up from the floor. "I'm looking for someone," he said. The young man didn't even blink. "So's half the city. She's maybe 17. Brown hair, no shoes. She might have been here last night." The young man scratched his cheek. "We don't keep a guest list. But I think I saw someone out by the bus stop. She sings sometimes. Not in English, maybe Spanish, maybe something else." Robert turned to Eli. The boy nodded slightly, his lips pressed together. Outside, the bus stop sat beside an old mural half covered in peeling flyers. Robert rolled Eli closer, then sat beside him on the bench. Cars passed, buses hissed. A woman in scrubs shuffled by, eyes down. No sign of her. The city didn't slow for anyone, least of all two strangers looking for a girl with no last name. Robert checked his watch twice, then stood, ready to leave. Eli didn't move. His eyes were locked on something in the alley across the street. "Dad," he said quietly. "There. That's her." She was half-shadowed, stepping out from behind a cracked dumpster, arms full of what looked like a bag of ice and a half loaf of bread. Her shirt hung off one shoulder. A bruise peeked from under the fabric. She didn't rush. She didn't seem surprised to see them. Her eyes, dark and steady, moved from Eli to Robert and stayed there. "You came," she said, as if that was something rare. "I'm not sure why," Robert answered. "I didn't ask you to be sure," she said, setting the ice down carefully onto the sidewalk. "I said I could help, but it's not me. There's someone else. Someone who does things differently." Robert tilted his head slightly, narrowing his eyes. "And you're what, her messenger?" She looked down at the melting bag, adjusted the knot in the plastic. "I just know the way." Eli was watching her, his arms folded across his lap. He didn't say anything, but when she looked at him again, something passed between them in ease, a kind of silent recognition. Robert didn't like it. He was used to protecting his son, guarding what was left of their world. But here was this barefoot girl offering a path he couldn't name, let alone control. "You'll have to follow," she said, nodding toward a side street lined with shuttered storefronts. "But there's one rule. No questions until you meet her." Robert looked at the girl again, really looked this time. She couldn't have been older than 16. Her face was too thin, her shoulders too sharp, but there was a steadiness to her, not confidence, not arrogance, something older than either, a kind of bone-deep knowing. "Who is she?" Robert asked, despite himself. Zara shook her head. "No questions." Eli turned in his chair toward his father. "Let's just go," he said. "That's simple." Robert hesitated for one more breath, then nodded. Zara picked up the bag and turned, stepping through a gap between two buildings. The alley swallowed her quickly. Its walls were marked with paint, initials, a child's handprint dried in faded blue. Robert pushed Eli forward, tires bumping over the uneven concrete, and just like that, they followed her into the part of the city where streetlights didn't always work and names were more memory than record. The alley behind the last bend opened onto a narrow street, half hidden behind a line of weathered trees and graffiti-tagged dumpsters. Robert had lost track of the turns. The buildings here looked old enough to creak with the weight of their own memories. Zara stopped before a brownstone that seemed almost part of the background. It had no number, no name, just a weathered wooden door with a faint oil mark near the handle, like the touch of too many palms. She didn't knock like a guest. She rapped 3 times, slow and exact. Footsteps shuffled from inside. Not cautious, just old. The door opened to reveal a woman who didn't flinch or squint in the sunlight. Her skin was the color of walnut bark, and her hair, in long, neat braids, fell like heavy threads over her shoulders. Her eyes scanned them once, lingering on Eli, and then she stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Bring the hurt with you." Zara said nothing. She entered first. Robert hesitated only long enough to grip the handles of Eli's chair tighter. Inside, the air changed. Not in temperature, but in weight. There was incense, something musky and old, curling toward the ceilings. The walls were covered in cloth, not pictures, just textured, faded cloth with deep colors and patterns that looked like they remembered stories. There were no medical instruments, no certificates, just a stillness that settled deep, not on the skin, but under it. The woman nodded once and pointed to a cushion near the center of the room. "Sit the boy here." Robert helped Eli out of the chair slowly. Eli didn't ask questions. He didn't fight. He moved with the kind of tired obedience that had become his habit. He settled on the cushion, legs folded stiffly in front of him. The woman, who Zara finally called Mama Sadia, knelt beside Eli and placed her hands gently on his knees. Her palms were broad, firm, warm. She didn't close her eyes or speak. She began to hum. It was a tune Robert couldn't place, not melodic in a conventional way. It swelled and dipped, like wind through hollow stone. At first, it sounded too strange, too foreign. Then something about it felt familiar. Eli's shoulders flinched. His eyes fluttered shut. His lips trembled. Robert shifted, unsure. His fingers gripped his own knee. Eli began to cry, soft at first, then harder. He didn't sob like a child. He cried like someone remembering something he'd been trying not to feel. His hands went to his lap, gripped the fabric of his pants. Mama Sadia didn't change pitch. She kept humming. Then, slowly, impossibly, Eli moved. His right foot, the one that had not lifted in 7 months, shifted forward. Robert leaned forward instinctively. Eli. But the boy wasn't hearing him. He was in whatever place that hum had opened. His left leg followed, both knees bent and lifted slightly. Eli pushed with his hands. For a brief second, he stood. His balance was uneven. His knees wobbled like paper, but he stood. Robert's heart slammed against his ribs. Logic told him to stop it. It told him this was dangerous, reckless, absurd. But something louder, something fatherly kept him frozen. Then Eli collapsed, not violently, just as if something inside him let go. He sank onto the mat, knees buckling. He pressed his face into his hands and cried harder than before. Robert rushed forward but stopped when Mama Sadia lifted her palm. "Let him," she said quietly. "That's part of it." Robert turned to Zara, whose face had not changed since they walked in. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't curious. She looked like someone who had seen this before and knew it wasn't the end or the beginning. After a minute, Mama Sadia placed her hand on Eli's back, right between his shoulder blades. She said, just loud enough for Robert to hear, "We don't heal. We open the doors that people closed a long time ago." Robert knelt slowly beside his son. He didn't touch him. He didn't speak. He simply waited. Eli's hands relaxed. His fingers opened. The hum had stopped, but its echo seemed to stay in the air, like dust that hadn't found where to settle. The drive home was quiet. Not the strained kind of silence that often settled between them. This one felt softer. Eli leaned against the door of the car, head tilted, eyes heavy. He hadn't said much after leaving the brownstone. Robert didn't press. He kept both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white, but his mind spun. There had been no explanation for what happened in that room, no medical logic, no theory from the neurologist they'd seen. Eli had moved, stood, then collapsed in tears, like something in him cracked wide open. Robert had stood there, watching, paralyzed by the contradiction of everything he knew and everything he just saw. At a red light on Olympic Boulevard, he checked the rearview mirror. Eli had dozed off. One arm rested loosely over his lap. Robert's eyes dropped for a second, just long enough to notice something strange. The inside of Eli's left knee, once pale and marked only by scar tissue, was blotched red, not bruised, not inflamed, just flushed. Like it had just begun to feel again. Robert didn't speak. He turned onto the quiet road leading to their Pasadena home, where hedges lined the driveway, and the garage light flickered once before turning on. Later that night, while Eli slept, Robert went down to the study. The shelves hadn't been touched in weeks. He pulled down a black accordion file labeled E, Langston Medical, and spread the contents across the desk. Pages fluttered, scans, reports, discharge notes. He moved faster, as if flipping fast enough might unlock something he'd missed. Then he stopped. A single intake sheet, dated April 8th, 2017. The location Westwood, Montessori. The reason for visit minor fall. The diagnosis superficial bruising, no neurological concern. Handwritten across the margin in red ink, no imaging recommended. Robert stared at it. He remembered that day vaguely getting a call from the preschool, being told that Eli had fallen off a small balcony during recess. It had seemed minor. The teacher had used the word bumped, and he, in the middle of a development deal in Chicago, had delegated everything to his assistant. No follow-up, no second opinion. The boy had cried for 2 nights and then moved on. But that date, April 8th, was the beginning of what they had once called the stiffness. The first time Eli had limped. The first of many pediatric visits where no one could name the pain. Robert leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. He picked up the folder again and turned to the second page. Attached was a name, Ms. Diane Mura, preschool lead teacher. He reached for his phone. The number was still in his contacts, buried deep. He dialed. 3 rings. Then a voice. This is Diane. Ms. Mura. This is Robert Langston. A pause. Nothing sharp, but a noticeable catch. I see, she said. I think we need to talk. It's about Eli. That fall I remember, she said quickly. Robert waited. The silence stretched. I never said everything I should have, Diane continued, voice lower now. I didn't know who to tell, back then, or how it would matter. But if you're calling about that day, yes. You should come see me. Where are you now? I run a counseling center for trauma kids in Culver City, 2901 Hayden Avenue. We close at 5. I'll be there tomorrow. She didn't say goodbye. She just ended the call. Robert sat still for a while, holding the phone like it still carried her voice. Upstairs. The hallway light flicked on. Robert stood at the foot of the stairs, watching Eli shuffle into the bathroom with his walker. He noticed something. Eli's posture straighter, his balance firmer. Not a miracle, but different. Robert didn't speak. He just turned off the study light behind him and stepped out onto the patio, the file folder tucked under his arm. The night air was sharp. The lights of the city blinked in the distance, but they felt 100 miles away. The Clover Ridge Center sat at the corner of Hayden and Hargis, its brick facade shaded by broad maple trees that filtered the morning sun into strips of soft gold. The parking lot was nearly empty when Robert pulled in. He turned off the ignition, but didn't reach for the door right away. Eli was with his grandmother that morning, giving Robert time to follow this thread. One more door from the past, half open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paste and pencil shavings elementary, in the way only schools and counseling centers ever were. A receptionist led him down a hallway lined with crayon drawings and polite motivational posters. The woman who met him at the end of it didn't look like someone who taught children anymore. Her hair had grayed at the temples, and the lines on her face weren't from worry so much as restraint. She wore a beige cardigan and the kind of shoes that suggested long hours standing on carpet. Her badge read, Diane Mura, Director Behavioral Therapy. They shook hands with formality, not warmth. She offered a chair but didn't sit right away. Instead, she moved to her filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer. From it, She pulled out a small notebook wrapped in a faded paper cover, the kind that kids made themselves with school glue and ruled lines. "I kept it," she said simply. "I wasn't sure I should have. It wasn't mine. But no one asked for it back." Robert took the notebook carefully. The front was covered in the shaky block letters ELI, private. He opened it. The first page was blank. The second page held the words that stopped his breath. "I fell down. My legs hurt. But I can't tell Daddy. He is always building." He turned the page. A stick figure drawing, messy but deliberate. A boy standing beside a tall, half-built skyscraper. Around him, the other stick figures walked past. Only one was looking his way, a girl with long hair and no shoes. Robert blinked slowly, letting the paper blur, then clear again. "I remember the fall," Diane said quietly. "It wasn't that far, but he cried longer than he should have, and the next few days, he limped. I filed a concern. I recommended neurological screening, but your assistant at the time declined, said the family preferred not to pursue further testing unless symptoms persisted." Robert didn't respond. He kept flipping pages. Each one was a little window. Eli had drawn alone more often than not. There were spirals, red crayon lines that circled stick legs, captions like "still hurts and no one sees it." "I didn't push harder," Diane added. "Maybe I should have, but he stopped bringing the journal after a few weeks, and then your wife got sick. I figured there were bigger things happening. The room felt too still." Robert closed the notebook slowly. "I didn't know he remembered any of it." He said, "Oh, he remembered." She replied, "He just didn't say it out loud." He looked up at her, the guilt pooling behind his eyes in a way he couldn't quite contain. "He's walking again. Not steadily, not fully, but he stood." She gave the barest hint of a smile, then leaned back slightly. "Sometimes healing happens where no one's looking." Robert stood, thanked her, and left with the notebook in his coat. The weight of it wasn't physical, but it pressed against his chest the whole ride back. He didn't drive home. He passed the turnoff for Pasadena, and instead kept heading east. Fremont looked different in daylight, less haunting, but no less forgotten. He parked near the alley and walked the path he'd taken days earlier. The brownstone sat the same quiet, still, somehow removed from the hum of the rest of the city. But the door didn't open. He knocked once, then again. Nothing. On the stoop. A folded slip of paper caught his eye. He knelt slowly and picked it up. The handwriting was delicate, careful, written in black ink. "Healing isn't linear. Don't chase it. Listen, there was no name, just that." Robert stood there for a long time, the notebook in one hand, the note in the other. The Langston Partners Tower stood high above Wilshire Boulevard, its mirrored windows catching the last light of a cloudless Los Angeles evening. From his office on the 17th floor, Robert could see the city stretch like a circuit board clean, gridded, detached. He hadn't stayed late in weeks, but tonight, something felt unfinished. He sat at his desk, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a half-drunk cup of black coffee beside a stack of weathered boxes. The oldest one was labeled Langston Family, 2015 to 2018. It hadn't been touched since the memorial. Dust clung to the flaps. He sliced it open, fingers careful. Inside, a tangle of folders, receipts, scanned medical charts, a few hand-typed letters from the hospice team, and near the bottom, tucked between insurance policy copies, he felt it, an envelope, light, unlabeled. He opened it. Out slipped a photograph, faded at the corners. The kind you'd forget existed until it called you by name. In it, Eli sat beaming atop the shoulders of an older black woman, her head wrapped in a maroon scarf. His arms clutched her forehead like reins, his smile big enough to crowd his face. Behind them, a chalkboard read, Fremont Wellness Project, 2016, Art Therapy Day. In the bottom corner, in handwriting, he recognized his wife's. It said, the only day he slept through the night. Robert stared, blinked, then turned it over. Nothing on the back. He leaned back in his chair. That year, 2016 was when things began unraveling. That was the year her treatment had started. He remembered driving her to Cedars-Sinai, remembered the scans, the silence in the car, but this trip to Fremont, he hadn't known. He dialed. The number still lived in his phone, Rosalind Nance, former assistant to Miriam Langston. She picked up on the second ring. Rosalind, it's Robert. A pause, then a soft, careful tone. Mr. Langston, it's been a long time. I found something, he said. A photo. Eli and an older woman, Mama Sadia, Fremont Wellness. Do you know anything about this? Rosalind exhaled through the receiver. Yes, she said quietly. Miriam used to take him there once a week. She believed in sound therapy, said it helped his nerves, especially after the nightmares started. She never told you. Robert shook his head, though she couldn't see it. No, he said. She didn't. She didn't want to fight you on it, Rosalind said gently. You were building the Sunset Complex then, always between meetings and calls. She used to say she'd hold both worlds quietly until they were ready to meet. Robert closed his eyes. Behind them, a flash of Eli, 4 years old, crying softly in his sleep, while he paced downstairs reviewing contracts. And Zara, he asked, almost a whisper. Zara lived there, Rosalind replied. Back then, she was maybe 9. Always with headphones, always humming. Sadia took her in after a domestic case. She helped with the music sessions. Your wife called her the little soul magnet. Robert pressed the phone tighter to his ear. What happened to the place? They lost funding, she said. The city pulled their grant last spring. Said it wasn't sustainable. Everything got shut down. The files. They were deleted. It was one of those silent closings. No headlines. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Something inside him ached in places that had been numb for too long. I think Miriam would have wanted you to know, Rosalind added, but not before you were ready. The line went quiet. He thanked her, then ended the call. The photo still sat in his lap. He traced Eli's face with his thumb. It wasn't magic that had stirred his son's legs. It was memory, reconnection. A door swinging open after years of being nailed shut. He stood, grabbed his coat, and left the office without turning off the lights. Outside, the sky had deepened into twilight. Instead of heading home, he pointed the car east. Fremont was waiting. 20 minutes later, he turned onto the same side street. The brownstone looked unchanged. Same windows, same stillness. He stepped up to the door, knocked once. No answer. Then he saw it folded neatly on the step. A piece of paper. No envelope. He picked it up. Healing isn't linear. Don't chase it. Listen. The next morning, the sun dragged itself up over the edges of South Los Angeles with no great urgency. Robert parked his car beside a squat, beige-bricked building that looked like it had been forgotten even by the city planners. The sign out front read, Jefferson Community Library, but the letters were cracked. The O in community replaced with duct tape. Inside, the air was thick with paper and rust, the kind of scent that clung to memory more than skin. A few patrons sat scattered around the main room, old men with newspapers, a mother helping a child sound out words, someone asleep in a corner chair. At the circulation desk stood a man in a pressed flannel shirt, white beard, neat but stubborn at the corners. His name tag said Walter in capital letters, like the world needed reminding. You looking for something specific? He asked without looking up. Robert approached slowly. I was told this library used to keep records for Fremont Wellness Project, the one that closed down last year. Walter finally looked up, his eyes narrowed, then softened a little. Sadia's crew, he said. Yeah, they used the basement for overflow, sound therapy tapes, kids' journals, art projects, stuff the city didn't want clogging up its fancy servers. Is anything still down there? Robert asked. Walter paused, then reached below the counter. A soft clink. He placed a heavy brass key on the counter. Technically, it's off limits, officially cleared out. He said, but I don't see many folks asking after ghosts these days. Watch your step. The rats know the layout better than we do. Robert nodded, took the key, and followed the narrow hallway toward the basement door. The stairs groaned beneath him, each step echoing like it remembered better days. At the bottom, the air was colder, still, touched by the faint scent of mildew and cardboard. The room was lined with metal shelves, most of them empty, but in the far corner, beside a half-collapsed filing cabinet, sat a single box. Dust caked its top. A hand-scribbled label read, Sadia, Archives 2015 to 2018. He pulled it free. Inside were construction paper drawings, tiny hands outlined in crayon, poems written in wobbly print. Some of the papers were torn, others folded carefully, then a folder pale blue, barely held together by an elastic band. He opened it. Photos. A dozen, maybe more. Children sitting cross-legged on mats, painting, laughing. One showed a circle of kids tapping on drums, and then one stopped his breath. Zara, 10 years old, maybe. Her hair pulled back, eyes half lowered in focus. She held a kalimba, its metal tines glinting under dim light. Next to her, cross-legged, was a small boy, his head tilted, watching her hands, his face unmistakable. Eli. Robert's heart pounded slowly, then harder. He flipped the photo over. No caption, just a faint fingerprint, maybe ink, maybe old glue. They had known each other, somehow, sometime before memory had names. He sat on the floor, the box beside him, the photo in his hand. What Zara had done to Eli wasn't magic, wasn't new. It was a return to something neither of them remembered but both had carried in silence. The hum, the standing, the tears. It had all been there before, buried by trauma, time, and a father too absent to notice. He stayed a moment longer, let the stillness settle into him, then stood, brushing dust from his sleeves. As he climbed the stairs, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Hello. The voice on the other end was soft, young, but not uncertain. Don't look for me anymore. It said, he needs to remember, not be told. Zara, he asked, breath tightening, but the line had already gone dead. 1 week passed like fog, lifting from the surface of still water, quiet, gradual, almost unnoticed until you looked back and saw the distance traveled. Eli had begun walking, not well, not far, but enough. From his room to the back patio without his father's help, just the sound of the crutches tapping the wood deck, and then the soft creak of the old wicker chair as he settled himself down. Robert never said much during those walks. He watched from the hallway, hands in his pockets, unsure if presence was enough. But Eli never mentioned Zara again. What he did do, what he did every day, was sit cross-legged on the floor beside the stereo, headphones on, playing the same humming tune that Mama Sadia had once sung. He didn't ask questions, didn't explain. He scribbled things in a notebook, but closed it quickly if Robert entered the room. It was a Saturday morning, just after sunrise, when Robert made the decision. Eli was already awake, finishing his cereal in silence. The air between them had thinned, not tense, just hollow. Robert set down his mug. Get your shoes on, he said. We're going back to Pico and Hoover. Eli didn't ask why. He just nodded. The streets of that junction felt different in the morning, less brittle than at night, more grounded. Vendors were setting up fruit carts. Buses hissed at corners. People moved with the kind of rhythm that suggested things had to get done, whether anyone watched or not. Robert parked on a side street and helped Eli out. The boy refused the second crutch today, stubborn, even if his limp slowed them. They walked past the church with the chipped cross, the mural of wings on the alley wall, the fenced-in lot where a basketball hoop hung crooked. Nobody recognized the name Zara. He asked slowly, respectfully. A barista at a corner stand shrugged. A woman sweeping her front stoop looked up, squinted, and shook her head. Finally, inside a small community resource office, wedged between a thrift shop and a laundromat, he found her. Letitia wore a staff badge and a hoodie with holes at the cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a green scarf. When he described Zara, Her eyes sharpened, not suspicious, but cautious. "She's not here now," she said. "But I've seen her. She doesn't stay long anywhere." "Do you know where she lives?" Robert asked. Letitia shook her head. "No one does." He waited. "But," she said, walking over to a wall of children's drawings, "she's been here." She pointed to a picture made in pastel chalk, worn, the corners curled. In it, a thin girl stood in the center of a circle of children. Her hand reached toward the sky. Around her were smiles, bursts of color, music notes drawn like little birds. "She helped one of our kids last year," Letitia said. Boy stopped talking after a shooting at his school. Zara sat with him, humming, never forced a word, just hummed. Robert leaned closer. In the lower corner of the drawing, a child's handwriting spelled one word, light. She never asked for anything. Letitia continued. Never stayed for thanks. Just said, "I do what I can, then I go." And then she left. Robert felt something tug in his chest, the kind of pull that doesn't ask permission, only direction. He turned to leave, reaching for his wallet, but before he could step outside, a small hand tugged at his coat. He looked down. A girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, stood there with tangled curls and eyes too sharp for her age. "I know where she is," she whispered, "but you gotta promise." Robert bent down. "Promise what? No reporters. No suits. Don't say you're rich." He nodded. "She don't like noise." The girl added, "She listens for quiet. If you're too loud, she'll disappear again." Lainey moved quietly, her bare feet making almost no sound on the cracked tile. Robert followed, with one hand gently pressed against Eli's back, steadying him as the boy balanced on crutches. The air inside the building was thick with dust and the scent of old mildew, the kind that clung to old fabric and lingered in corners like a memory that never left. They stepped through what had once been the lobby of a rundown motel, its front desk long abandoned. The carpet stripped bare, ceiling tiles hanging like tired thoughts. Past the broken vending machine and a collapsed couch, Lainey turned into a narrow corridor, walls covered in chalk drawings, some smudged, some vibrant. There were suns and flowers, children's faces with wide eyes, a whale leaping from water, a woman with her hands open to the sky, all drawn with the kind of aching hope only children could manage. Robert slowed as they approached the end of the hallway. There, the final drawing stopped him. A boy stood alone in darkness, no mouth, only eyes. And around him, 100 chalk-drawn hands reaching toward him, but none touching. Lainey looked back at Robert, then pressed her palm against the boy's chest in the drawing. A click sounded. The wall gave way just enough for her to push open a hidden door. Inside, the room glowed dimly with light filtered through a hanging scarf draped across a single bulb. The space was no bigger than a walk-in closet, but it was alive mats stacked neatly in the corner, folded blankets, a bucket of bandages, a low wooden table with cracked bowls, and an old kalimba resting on top. Zara was kneeling on the floor, binding a makeshift splint onto the arm of a boy no older than 7. She didn't look up. Her hands were calm, practiced. Only when she tied the final knot did she glance over and speak, her voice low and steady. "Eli, do you remember anything yet?" Robert opened his mouth, unsure whether to explain, but Eli beat him to it. The boy's voice was soft, but certain. "I remember the song. My mom used to hum it, before bed. Sometimes when she brushed my hair." Zara nodded. Her eyes met Robert's now. "It's not a song, it's breath. Mama Sadia taught it to me when I was your son's age. Your wife, she learned it too. The night before her last treatment. She asked me to sing it. For him, that's when we met." Robert's body went still, like something inside him was both sinking and rising all at once. He looked at Eli, at the quiet concentration in his face, the way his hand had begun to tap, almost absent-mindedly, against his thigh, matching a rhythm heard only inside him. "You were there?" Robert asked, voice dry. Back then, with her Zara nodded once, solemnly. She didn't want pain to be the last thing Eli felt from her. She wanted him to carry breath, not grief. Silence stretched between them. The child with the splint had already curled against the wall, asleep. Eli stepped further into the room, his crutches clicking softly against the floor. He reached for the kalimba. His fingers hesitated, then plucked a few tentative notes. Robert knelt beside Zara. "You don't have to keep hiding like this. I can get you out. Somewhere safe, stable." Zara gave a small smile, tired but not bitter. "You think I'm hiding. I'm not." She looked around the small room, the warmth, the children's blankets, the sound of Eli playing. "This is where I live, where I'm needed. You can still be part of our life," Robert said. "Let me help." Zara turned toward him fully now. Her palm rested lightly against his chest, just above the heart. Her gaze didn't accuse, it simply saw. "You don't need to bring me with you," she said gently. "You just need to let him walk." Then she stood, with one last glance at Eli still playing. Still remembering, she stepped past the doorframe and disappeared down the corridor without a word. The elevator ride to the 17th floor felt longer than usual. The glass panels showed the same city Robert Langston had helped shape its steel bones, its glass skin, the echo of success in every direction. But now, it looked different, as if the shine no longer reflected light, only silence. He stepped into the boardroom of Langston Partners, wearing the same tailored navy suit he'd worn for over a decade, but it no longer fit quite right. There was a tension across his shoulders, a stiffness in his collar. Around the table sat men and women he'd built empires with: shareholders, real estate directors, development advisors, all with practiced smiles and carefully crossed legs. Robert didn't sit. Instead, he walked to the screen at the end of the room and connected his laptop. No preamble. Just a slide that read, "Fremont, 2016. Displaced for parking structure E12. Beneath the title, an old satellite image showed the erased lot where a community once stood. A few eyebrows lifted. Most eyes narrowed. "I want to revisit this," Robert said, voice flat. "And not just this. Every urban renewal zone we pushed through in the last 10 years, especially those that led to closure of youth wellness sites." Silence first. Then Lawrence Bickham, head of project finance, leaned forward. "Robert, what's the point here?" Robert tapped the remote. A second slide. Projected net return, 2025. 38.6 M USD. Then another number of youth programs defunded, 17. "I'm not proposing we undo anything," Robert said. "I'm proposing we reinvest, restore, sponsor rebuilding of sites like Fremont Wellness Project, under our name, quietly." A murmur passed through the room. One of the women from HR coughed lightly. It was Emma, VP of Strategy, who spoke next. "We're not in the nonprofit business." "We are," Robert replied. "We just stopped admitting it when the returns got too clean. And that was when it shifted." The cold in the room sharpened. Arms crossed. Pens clicked. Coffee went untouched. Later that evening, the ballroom at the Jonathan Club was awash of crystal chandeliers and bone-colored table linens. Robert stood behind a glass podium as a pianist wrapped up Clair de Lune. The guests, donors, developers, alumni of all the right schools, chatted softly between shrimp cocktails. He adjusted the mic. "I know I'm not supposed to talk long tonight," he began, "and I won't. I just have one thing to say." The room quieted, politely. "There was a time my son couldn't walk, and people whose names I still don't fully know, helped him begin to. They weren't doctors, they weren't rich, they didn't wear our suits or come to our parties, but they were the ones who stayed with him when it hurt." A pause. "But the truth is, they shouldn't have had to do it from the shadows. They shouldn't have had to hide in back alleys or lose their centers to the projects we called progress. Because I helped erase the very ground they stood on." No applause. Just the clink of one glass being set down too hard. "I want that to change." He stepped away from the mic, leaving behind a silence more honest than any cheer. Afterward, near the valet entrance, a member of the board stood waiting. Paul Grafton, head of infrastructure, older than Robert by 10 years and sharper in the eyes. "You're getting sentimental," Paul said, lighting a cigarette with fingers that didn't shake. "That used to be your weakness. Now it's becoming dangerous." Robert met his gaze without flinching. "Sentiment built this company," he said, "but so did forgetting." Paul exhaled smoke slowly, almost casually. "If you bring up Fremont again," he said, "in any meeting, in any public setting, don't expect your seat to still be waiting." The breeze lifted the corner of Robert's coat. He didn't respond, just stared past Paul into the night where the city lights didn't look quite so proud anymore. The house was quiet when Robert stepped in. Too quiet for 8:30 at night. The hallway lights were off, but a soft glow came from the living room. He set his keys down, loosened his tie, and followed it. There, in the middle of the rug, was Eli, barefoot, legs trembling, arms stretched out slightly for balance. No Nang, just the boy, standing alone. Then he moved. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't steady. His left foot dragged slightly with each step, but he was walking. One step, then another, and then he stumbled, fell hard onto his knees with a muffled thud, but he didn't cry. He didn't look around for help. He simply pressed his palms to the floor, braced, and pushed himself back up. Robert stayed frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. The boy took 2 more steps before noticing him. They stared at each other for a long moment, not with the distance of months past, but something closer, like the air between them had finally thinned. Eli blinked once, then said, "I don't need to be perfect." "Right." Robert felt something shift inside him like an old door unsticking after years sealed shut. He walked over, knelt beside his son, and pulled him close. "No," he whispered. "You never had to be. I was just too proud to say what mattered." Eli didn't respond right away. He pressed his forehead into Robert's chest. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "I remembered her. Zara. Not just now, before. From when I was 4, I always thought she wasn't real, like a dream I made up. But when I heard that song, it came back. Her face, the way she sang while I was drawing in that cold room." Robert's breath caught. He leaned back, hands on Eli's shoulders. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Eli shrugged. "No one believed in things like that, not even me." They sat together on the floor, neither speaking for a while, just the hum of the fridge in the next room and the creak of the house settling. Robert felt something both heavy and clean settle on his shoulders, like truth had a weight, but also a clarity. Eli stood again and limped toward his nightstand. From the top drawer, he pulled out a folded sheet of paper, worn soft at the edges. He held it out. Robert unfolded it carefully. A child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. A brown house, no windows, no name. But surrounding it were people, faceless and many. A girl in red, standing on the porch. A boy, half her size, drawing with a chalk piece near the steps. Beneath it, written in uneven letters, the place where people find each other again. Robert stared at the drawing, something catching behind his eyes. Not tears, not quite, but close. Eli looked up at him, searching. "Do you think she's still there?" he asked. Robert folded the drawing gently, almost reverently. He set it down and placed a hand on his son's back. "I don't know," he said, "but that place should be." Eli nodded, as if he already knew the answer. And Robert stood, straightened his back, and decided not just to look, but to rebuild. The civic building on North Main had the same pale gray stillness as a waiting room. Robert stood in line with a manila folder tucked tight under his arm, like it might slip away if he let go. The people ahead of him were young activists in denim jackets, a retired librarian with neatly folded petitions, and an elderly man holding a photo of a boarded-up playground. Robert didn't belong. He knew it. But he stayed in line anyway. When his name was finally called, he stepped forward and gave his name into the mic with the flat cadence of someone used to being listened to but unsure this time. "Robert Langston, Private citizen. Some in the crowd turned. A few whispered. A man in the back with a tablet lifted his chin. Curious. The name still meant something, though. What exactly depended on who you asked. The council members looked up. A few brows furrowed. One of them, a sharp woman in a teal blazer, leaned forward. Robert opened his folder, then paused. His hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with restraint. I came today not as a businessman, he began, but as a father. My son's name is Eli. He was injured in ways I didn't fully understand. He stopped speaking, stopped moving, and then someone brought him back. He took out the child's drawing, the brown house, the faceless figures, the girl in red. This was the place, he said, lifting it carefully. Fremont Wellness. It used to be here, right here in this city. But it was shut down, erased partly because of people like me, because we called it inefficient, unprofitable, replaceable. A soft rustle swept the crowd. Robert glanced at the council again. I know what the law says. The paperwork is gone. The funding was reallocated. But I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for one building, one room, one step toward repair. He took a breath, steadied himself. I can't offer proof, but I can offer presence. I can offer the name of a child who was saved, and the name of a girl who saved him. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Councilwoman Diaz, the one in teal, stood slowly. You were part of the team that authorized the redevelopment of Fremont 7 years ago, weren't you? Robert nodded. Yes, and I regret it every day. She looked at him, long and steady, then turned to the audience. If a man's willing to kneel where he once stood above, then maybe we should meet him there. The shift happened quietly. Another council member tapped her gavel once and leaned into the mic. Let's open a subcommittee to reevaluate the proposal. Behind Robert, a woman from a non-profit mental health network stood up and raised her hand. We'll co-sponsor. No cost to the city. Just give us the keys. It wasn't thunderous, no applause, but something moved. Afterward, Robert stepped out into the sun. The sidewalks were still cracked, the traffic still thick, but the air felt different, like something had been let in. He didn't see the woman until she was next to him. Tall, slender, a scarf tied over her hair, eyes half hidden behind dark glasses. She didn't speak, just slipped something into his hand, a small white envelope, and melted back into the crowd before he could find words. He opened it there on the curb. Inside, a single card, handwritten in careful, quiet cursive. Healing begins where people feel seen. The lot on Fremont and 5th looked like it had exhaled and collapsed. What used to be the Fremont Wellness brownstone stood now as a skeleton, walls stripped bare, floor beams hanging like tired arms. The gabled roof was gone. One broken window remained on the second floor, its frame still clinging to a torn piece of yellow curtain. Robert stepped over a pile of rusted nails and past a torn signboard that once read, "Community begins here." He stood in what used to be the front room. Only a few bricks remained upright gray and blistered from time. At the far end, a cracked mirror leaned against a fractured wall, still clinging to its place like it remembered what had once stood behind it. Robert walked over slowly. Dust clung to his blazer. His shoes scraped the cement. When he looked into the mirror, the face staring back wasn't the man who chaired Langston Partners. This man had weathered edges, hollow around the eyes, hair loosened by wind. He didn't see power. He saw penance. Letitia arrived an hour later. She came wearing a windbreaker and holding a weathered folder close to her chest. Her face softened when she saw him. I found something, she said, voice low. One of the older volunteers, she kept it hidden after the funding was pulled, said it didn't feel right throwing it away. She handed him a sealed envelope marked only by his wife's handwriting. The paper had yellowed. The seal had long cracked. Robert didn't open it right away. He stood with it in his hands, breath quiet. Then, slowly, he slid his finger beneath the flap and unfolded the pages. Her script curved like music. She sang to him. Rob, the letter read. Zara, That girl, the only one who made Eli laugh after he fell. I watched her cradle him like she'd known his hurt forever. I couldn't do that anymore, not the way I used to. But she could. If Eli ever forgets what music feels like, please, please let him hear her again. Robert folded the letter back carefully, as though holding her breath inside the creases. Eli arrived later that afternoon. He walked slowly, but without his crutches. His eyes scanned the bare bones of the building with a stillness Robert hadn't seen before. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He placed his palm on one of the half-standing walls. "I remember this," Eli whispered. "The sound came from here. She sat next to me, on the floor. I was crying, and she just put her arms around me. She didn't even ask why." His voice broke, but he didn't step back. Robert stood behind him. No advice, no correction, just presence. Then, from the alley beside the site, a boy stepped into view, barefoot, thin. His knee wrapped in bandage too big for his leg. He looked at Eli, then down at his hands. "She said, if I ever saw you again," the boy whispered, "and you were standing on your own, I had to give you this." He held out a piece of folded paper. It had been handled many times, creased soft at the corners. Eli took it gently, unfolded it. A melody written by hand. One word at the top. "Listen." The elevator was out, so Robert and Eli climbed 3 flights of concrete stairs. The walls echoed with faint laughter and the distant tapping of drums. At the top floor, a sign read, "Pico Union Community Arts, After Hours Music Circle." A handwritten arrow pointed toward a metal door propped open by a brick. They stepped into a rooftop strung with soft, golden bulbs, folding chairs, beat-up cushions, and old crates circled the open space. In the middle, children sat cross-legged, their eyes fixed on the girl in the center, Zara, cradling a kalimba in her lap, plucking each note with careful ease. The melody was simple, but haunting, warm, familiar. It floated like breath across the quiet rooftop. Eli didn't rush forward. He stood by the wall, just past the door, both feet planted firm. He no longer held crutches. His hands were at his sides, his breath steady. Robert stopped a few paces behind. He didn't say anything, didn't even blink. When the song ended, the children clapped with the kind of joy only children can give, quick, messy, genuine. Zara smiled and bowed her head slightly. Then, almost instinctively, she turned. Her eyes met Eli's. They didn't speak at first, just looked at each other like two people seeing the same painting in a different light. Zara's voice came low and calm. "You remember now, don't you?" Eli nodded. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't look away. "All of it," he said. "The room, the song, the day you hugged me and told me it was okay to fall." One of the younger kids crawled into Zara's lap. She held them loosely, as if her hands knew how to hold and let go at the same time. Robert walked forward, slowly. The man who had once made cities bend now stepped gently between scattered juice boxes and plastic tambourines. He sat beside Zara on an overturned milk crate. He pulled a folder from his coat, worn from being opened too often. Inside were official forms, grant proposals, signed permits. The new Fremont Wellness was greenlit, the property secured, and at the top of the advisory list was her name. He held it out, not with formality, but as something he hoped she might want. Zara didn't take it. She didn't even look down. "I don't need a title," she said softly. "I don't want a job description or a board meeting." Robert's hand lowered. "I just want a room," she continued, "one with an open door." She stood, gathering the few papers around her, then paused, walked over to Eli and placed the kalimba in his hands. "It's yours now," she said. Eli held it like it weighed something more than wood. The kids began to drift off, called by guardians, drawn away by promises of late dinners and bedtime. The rooftop emptied, little by little. Zara didn't say goodbye. She just walked toward the stairs. Eli watched her go, his thumb still resting on the first note of the song. The reopening of Fremont wasn't a grand affair. No fireworks, no spotlight stage, just folding chairs arranged in arcs, string lights hung across exposed beams, and the hum of community breathing in the same rhythm. In the main hall, once a crumbling shell, now warm with murals and reclaimed wood neighbors, staff, donors, city officials, and a few cautious reporters gathered. Robert stood at the back, hands folded, heart steady but heavy. He didn't speak tonight. This wasn't his voice to lead with, one by one. Speakers took the mic. A mother from Boyle Heights shared how the food pantry had kept her son fed during lockdown. A volunteer from Skid Row recounted her first day back after recovery. The audience nodded. Quiet claps. Real stories. Nothing forced. Then, as the host, a young woman from the neighborhood with a clipboard and a too-tight ponytail scanned her notes. She paused, then smiled. Our final voice tonight is someone who stepped through fear to memory. Please welcome Eli Langston. The room hushed. Eli rose from his chair on the side. No one offered to help. He didn't need it. His steps were steady, measured. The same boy who once flinched at a hallway shadow now walked toward a crowd of grown-ups in city suits, with something behind his eyes that couldn't be taught. He took the mic with both hands. It was too tall for him, so he adjusted it, slightly awkward, then stood still. For a long time. He began, I thought I was just something broken that grown-ups had to carry. Silence. Breathless. I thought if I stayed quiet, people would forget, that maybe forgetting made it easier. He scanned the front row, found Robert's face, then kept going. But one day, a woman didn't ask me what was wrong. She asked me what I remembered. She asked about music, about breath. She played a song I didn't know I knew, a small sob from somewhere in the center. She didn't wear a badge, didn't give me medicine. She just sat down on the floor beside me and sang. He paused, let it settle, and I stood up. Nothing moved, no cough, no whisper. I don't know where she came from or why she left. But she gave me back my mother's voice, and that's what made me believe I could use my own. He stepped back. The room erupted, but not with noise. It rose, one by one. People stood, like something sacred had been offered, and silence was the only fitting return. Then, a chair scraped. A man near the center row stood abruptly, middle-aged, gray at the temples. He stepped forward, without invitation, pulled a badge from his jacket. Luis Barrera, City Planning Office. People turned. I was the one who signed the defunding of Fremont, he said, voice cracking. I thought these places were excess. That healing looked like numbers going up, not children standing up. He looked at Eli, at Robert. I was wrong. His head bowed, and then it happened. Eli walked to the edge of the stage, pulled the kalimba from under his chair, held it for a second, then turned and handed it to a girl in the front row, maybe 7, maybe 8. She looked unsure. He nodded. She plucked the first note, tentative, then another, and another. Listen floated into the air, unsteady but growing. The whole room didn't sing. They listened. And when the music faded and people began gathering for photos, Zara's seat 2 rows back on the aisle was empty. All that remained was a single torn note resting on the chair. Let healing move without needing to be seen. The morning light in Fremont carried a kind of hush, as if the neighborhood had paused to listen. Robert stood outside the newly painted wooden door of what used to be the shelter. The air smelled faintly of fresh lacquer and morning bread from a cart nearby. In his hands, he held a plain folder. Inside it, the official registration documents for a youth counseling center now legally named Listen. There were no plaques, no ribbon cutting, no speeches, just the quiet weight of something made right, finally, without needing to be seen. The center bore no mention of Langston. That was intentional. What Robert had once built with a name in gold now stood with a name in lowercase letters spoken more than displayed. He'd chosen Listen because it was never about being credited. It was about remembering what had been overlooked. Across town, at Baldwin Hills Public School, a different crowd gathered. The auditorium buzzed gently. Students in pressed shirts, parents holding cameras, a few teachers blinking back quiet pride. Eli waited backstage. He wore a blue button-down and held no notes. He didn't need them. When it was his turn, he stepped up without hesitation. The podium was tall, but not taller than him anymore. He didn't talk about his leg, or the surgeries, or what had been taken from him. He said simply, "There was a girl who believed I could walk, even when I couldn't believe it myself." The room stilled, and when she played a song, I remembered who I was before I forgot. In the third row, Letitia squeezed Lainey's hand gently. Lainey, older now, no longer wore the same wary eyes. She leaned into Letitia, chin lifted slightly, at the very back. Mama Sadia sat tall in her chair, her hands clasped, her head forward. She didn't clap. She didn't cry. She just listened. The applause came slow, then steady, but Eli had already stepped away. He didn't wait for fanfare. He'd said what mattered. Robert wasn't there. He didn't need to be. At that moment, he was still in Fremont, helping an old woman with her paperwork for a GED program the center had just opened. Around him, walls that had once held silence now held soft music. A boy plucked a string instrument in a side room. A girl painted quiet blues along a hallway. Healing didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived like this in small acts, behind unlocked doors. And then, as the sun dipped low along Pico Boulevard, the streets warmed in that golden hue that makes everything feel a little softer. Near a bench at the bus stop, a girl no longer a child slung a worn backpack over one shoulder. The kalimba rested in her arms. She sat, didn't speak, just tilted her head toward the fading sky and let her thumbs press gently into wood and metal. A melody rose, simple, patient, something like the sound of someone leaving and choosing not to say goodbye. The last light of the day caught the corner of an old window, dusty, cracked, but still holding on. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime made of bottle caps and strings stirred, soft and unpolished, yet unmistakably real. Not every wound leaves quietly, and not every answer arrives with clarity. But sometimes, in the echo of a familiar song or the touch of an unexpected hand, something shifts, not loudly, just enough. Maybe grace isn't about fixing what broke. Maybe it's just choosing to return, again and again, to the place that made you feel seen.